Hi guys, and welcome to the Stephen King Sematary Club. I'm definitely a fanatic. I love this stuff. I will be discussing the first part of Stephen King's Carrie. Part 1, Bloodsport. The Signet paperback book is 245 pages. It's a very quick read. The first part ends, I think, at page 115. So we're almost halfway through the book with just part 1. So this was published in 1974. It was Stephen King's first novel, and the dedication is to his wife, Tabitha. It says, "This is for Tabby, who got me into it and then bailed me out of it." And I always loved that. I love the relationship between the two of them. It's so cute, and they really support each other, and I really love that so much. And with this book, Stephen King had started it. He wrote the locker room scene and, all the period stuff, the girls being catty and bitchy, and he didn't like it. He didn't feel like he understood it enough to go forward, and he crumpled it up, put it in the trash, and Tabitha rescued it from the waste paper basket and said, "Hey, you need to stick with this. I think you have something." And he did. She knew. It's just adorable. So we start with part 1. Part 1 is called Bloodsport. I got my little notebook. I was taking notes because the thing about this reread project is that I want to have some nice, comprehensive, they're not ever going to be exhaustive, because if they were going to be exhaustive, I would comment on every single thing and I would just never get anywhere. So part 1 is Bloodsport. We're introduced to Carrie White. It's quickly established that Carrie is a little chunky and she's got some acne and she kind of has limp, mousy hair, and she's in the gym shower with a whole bunch of girls who are a lot more Barbie-esque, or whatever you want to say, stereotypically popular and attractive people. And we know right away that she's been bullied since the first grade by some of these girls. So this is just a long-running thing for her. On page 7, it says, "She stood like a patient ox, aware that the joke was on her, as always, dumbly embarrassed but unsurprised." So she is used to being picked on. And so, okay, first of all, this is not how I remember gym showers during my days of, middle school and high school. But for the purposes of theatrics and whatnot, we'll go with it. Carrie is taking a shower, trying to just exist in this high school environment and not make waves or whatever. And it is pointed out to her that she has started her period. She has never had a period before, and she freaks out because she thinks she is dying. She thinks something is very, very wrong. And the girls in the locker room start throwing things at her. They start throwing tampons and pads at her, yelling, "Plug it up." It's very vicious and very primal. The gym teacher, who she's going to be a little bit different from the gym teacher in the movie. This gym teacher is named Miss Desjardins. Gym teacher in the movie, I believe, is a composite of this gym teacher in the book and then the principal or assistant principal of the school. So the gym teacher rushes in, yells at the girls, tells them to knock it off. She's disgusted by Carrie because she feels like Carrie's just being obtuse or is there's, she just doesn't understand that this is Carrie's first period because Carrie's so old. And I love the detail where Carrie leaves a bloody handprint on the gym teacher's white shorts. And that's something that we'll get to later in the movie also. Well, Carrie is freaking out thinking she's dying. The teacher is being not super helpful at first, but then comes around and starts coming to Carrie's aid once she realizes exactly what's going on. A light blows out from a light bulb, some baseball bats fall down, just little stuff like that, little details that give us a hint of Carrie's powers. A tactic that Stephen King uses, and it's very clever because it allows for a lot of backstory without having to start the story from the beginning, but to give history and stuff like that. He uses like a mixed media type version of storytelling. And so in his novel, he will include little excerpts that are supposed to be from newspapers, and those give context. It allows for a lot of information to be given in a very short amount of space, and it doesn't feel jarring. It's a very clever tactic. So the gym teacher takes Carrie to the principal's office to get dismissed due to the trauma. And the assistant principal gets her name wrong several times, I think at least 3 times. He calls her Cassie, and her last name he also calls her Wright. So he calls her Cassie White, he calls her Cassie Wright, he calls her all these different combinations, but never the correct name. Carrie gets upset and flips over his ashtray, which he was certain he had put further away from the edge on the desk than he did, but we all know it's because of Carrie's powers that it flipped over. Carrie is dismissed from school, and as she's going home, we get a different kind of Carrie from the movie. Now, the Carrie in the movie I always felt was more of a victim who just suddenly snaps, but because of the nature of novels, we get more inside Carrie's head, and she has these thoughts about how she wants to bash in the heads of these girls who have been picking on her entire life. So there is this little flame of revenge that is being fanned in Carrie's head. She decides maybe there's something she can do about it. Maybe she can fight back. And she is kind of, in a way, premeditating her actions. We learn that Carrie has tried to fit in. She has tried to go against her mother's wishes. Her mom is ultra-religious and domineering and thinks everything is sinful, everything is just evil. And the natural things, like natural puberty things and natural sexual desires and things like that, are all bad. All this stuff is the result of you having sinned. So you sinned, and therefore this stuff happens to you. It's not that everyone goes through this. It's that we are asking for these things because of our sinful ways. Like, if we hadn't sinned, none of this would have happened. Girls would be flat-chested. There would be no babies, I guess, no pregnancy, that kind of thing. Her mother forbade her to shower with the other girls. Carrie tries to fit in. She tries to not pray in public. She wants to be accepted, but I guess from, the word go, she was seen as weird, and it stuck. It's a great part where as she's walking home, a kid on a bike picks on her. So she knocks this kid off the bike, and she thinks, oh, I wish I could just, do that. And then she realizes that she did make that happen, and she's starting to comprehend her powers. There is an event that is mentioned in these newspaper clippings, and we gradually get more and more pieces of the story coming through, and at one point we hear the whole story told by the neighbor girl who used to live next to Carrie. and she would sunbathe in her backyard in a modest one-piece suit. Carrie's mom flipped out, thought she was sinful, didn't want her daughter seeing this disgusting display, and she lectured the girl's mother. The girl's mother decided to escalate this into some sort of backyard war, and the poor teenage girl as a pawn. She bought her a tiny bikini, had her go out and sunbathe. The girl's out there sunbathing, and she wakes up, realizes she falls asleep in the sun, wakes up, and Carrie, little Carrie, who's about 3 years old, is standing over her, and she's looking at her, and her top had fallen down, so her breasts are exposed. And Carrie's curious about it, asks about her body, and there's a whole discussion. Carrie calls the breasts dirty pillows. It's a word that her mom uses. Says that, they are because of sin, that people have them. So Margaret White comes out, and she is livid. She is just insane with rage, and she drags Carrie in. There's a whole scuffle, and there's stuff being knocked around, there's yelling, there's screaming. Ice chunks start falling from the sky, and huge rocks also start falling. And the rocks are only landing on the White's property, which is bizarre. So we start realizing that Carrie has pretty magnificent power. There's this, the Day of the Rocks thing. We realized that even as a 3-year-old, she had an immense amount of power. And this isn't really referenced in the movie. We hear a little more about Sue Snell and Tommy Ross. Now, Sue is one of the girls who was throwing things at Carrie, and she's feeling bad about it. She wants to make amends. She doesn't like her behavior. And she is with a popular guy, Tommy Ross. They're both popular. And it says, they had become a fixed star in the shifting firmament of the high school's relationships, the acknowledged Romeo and Juliet, which I really like because that's kind of a foreshadowing of tragedy in their future. Sue feels very guilty, and she feels like a terrible person. She wants to escape her cookie-cutter life of conformity that she's heading toward. So Carrie is at home. She is thinking about how the whole terrible situation went down. Her mama is upset. She calls her mom Mama, and she's a big woman, really big woman, and very religious. She holds worship services, which are just her preaching to Carrie on, it says Sunday, Tuesday, and Friday for about 2 to 3 hours. So she is just really into this religious stuff. And her mom starts showing signs of being afraid when Carrie does things, because Carrie says, "I'll make the stones come again, Mama." And that terrifies her. There's this great part in the book where Carrie moves. She's sewing, and she gets up to go to bed, I believe. She's not standing by the sewing machine, but she moves the needle up and down, and her mom freaks out a little bit. Her mom is kind of freaked out because Carrie's nowhere near it, and that's just another display of her power. The gym teacher lectures the girls on their behavior and is going to dish out punishment to them. Things get really heated with a girl, Chris Hargensen, who is the absolute villain in this book. In the case of Carrie White, the only witness to any possible prologue to the final climactic events was Margaret White, and she, of course, is dead. Now, I love that Stephen King does this. He does this a lot, where he tells us that a character will die, and it still comes, in a way that's a spoiler, but the way that he is able to still elicit emotion from you when it happens is amazing. It never ceases to amaze me. Like, I can know that someone is going to die within the next couple hundred pages, and it's still impactful to me. And I think that's a very difficult skill, because you could do it that way and ruin things, but the way Stephen King does it is he just drops these little bits of information that tell you something is going to happen, and then when it actually does happen, it is still really moving. So I had to include that. Chris Hargenson's father comes in to yell at the principal for the treatment of his daughter, the fact that, you know, the gym teacher was mean to her and she physically and verbally abused her, and the principal fires right back with, well, you know, this is what your daughter did to this other student, and we could very easily, you know, throw the same back at you guys. And I like that scene, and I wish that had made it into the movie, but it did not. On page 71, it says, there's a little, there's an article, and in it, they talk about Carrie's 7th grade English teacher, Mr. Edwin King, which I think is really cute because Stephen King's middle name is Edwin, and he was an English teacher, so that's like a cute little putting himself in his very first book, and I like that. Now, then we get into Carrie starts exercising her powers. She is literally like moving hairbrushes up and down, moving the ends of her bed up and down, that kind of thing. So she is plotting, she's thinking of revenge, she is kind of premeditating actions in her brain. I'm not saying that she, you know, isn't a victim or that she doesn't have reason. I'm just saying that it's not just a she snapped. It's she's understanding what her powers can do to people if necessary. You know, the part that a lot of people tend to remember, and that's Tommy trying to ask Carrie out to the prom because Sue has asked him to do it as a way to make things up to Carrie. You know, he asks her, she says no, she's suspicious because whenever anyone's nice to her, it seems that something goes awry. You know, they just do it for their amusement. And there's some major foreshadowing on page 87. Carrie says, no, it will be a nightmare. And Tommy convinces her, he says, well, no, come on, it will be fine, we'll make it fine. Carrie's like lifting beds, she's lifting dressers, she's lifting really heavy shit. And Carrie is starting to remember things. The day of the stones, her mother choked her, and she came at her with a Bible and a butcher knife, telling Carrie that you'll never look at that naked wickedness again. And Carrie flipped out, and she ended up just destroying tons of stuff in the house. I think the dining room table went through the living room window, that kind of thing. It says, then she had fainted herself, and after that there were no more memories. Mama did not speak of it. The butcher knife was back in its drawer. So all of this gets repressed, and now things are starting to come forward into her consciousness. Carrie announces that she's going to the prom. Her mom does not like that, and you know, they get into this argument about Carrie having to go into the closet, and we haven't really discussed the closet, but that's where Carrie is kind of shoved in to pray and ask for forgiveness, and she spends hours in there. One time she was there for more than 24 hours, and you know, she had to just stand there the whole time until her mom decided to let her out. And you know, Carrie, her mom doesn't want her to go to the prom. Carrie refuses to go to the closet. She's starting to stand up to her mom. She says, I don't want to fight with you, Mama. I only want to be let to live my own life. I don't like yours. That's on page 97. And it's just so sad. It's so sad because you know that if her mom had just stopped, that Carrie could have had a better life. On page 98, Tommy Ross didn't love her. She knew that. This was some strange kind of atonement, and she could understand that and respond to it. So we do have Carrie acknowledging that this might not be a joke, but it's definitely not real, and she's just going along with it. I think she kind of wants it to be real, but she is preparing herself for, you know, disappointment. Continuing, it says, he said it would be good, that they would see to it. Well, she would see to it they better not start anything. They just better not. So we do get Carrie going on the defensive. You know, she's ready if something does happen. She is not going to be messed with anymore. She has decided. So the remaining portion of this first part, Chris Hargensen snoops around the prom stuff, and she sees the ballot, the king and queen ballot, finds out that Tommy and Carrie are now on the ballot for prom king and queen. She finds the layout of the whole prom stage and the tables and where the king and queen will be. And she sends her delinquent boyfriend, Billy Nolan, and his friends out to a farm where they kill 2 pigs, which is always sad to me. And they drain the pigs of blood and bring the blood back for their fucked up little plan. It is really twisted. It's a really twisted concept, and the theme of blood runs through this entire book. The theme of blood and sacrifice. Carrie is basically a sacrificial lamb, so it's like bookended with period blood and pig blood and the sacrifice of the pigs, pig's blood for a pig, as Billy Nolan said, and it's all very tied in. So that is part 1. What do you like or dislike about this? I really enjoy the way that everything is explained via old articles and stuff like that. I think it moves the story along a lot, and I think we immediately have great sympathy for Carrie. I think early on we get a great feel for Stephen King's writing style and the way he makes you really care about his characters, and I very much appreciate that. That is something that I think he has kind of passed over because he's a horror writer, but he has great character development. He's amazing. So part 2 is called Prom Night. So we start out where Carrie is trying on her prom dress, and she hasn't made it herself. She usually makes plain clothes. They're not very trendy, and they're usually very modest, I guess. They don't show much. So this prom dress is red, it's crushed velvet, it's very luxurious and kind of scandalous. So Mama, of course, is displeased, and she is standing there watching Carrie try the dress on. Carrie doesn't even have a mirror, probably because that's vanity. So she's looking at herself in the reflection of her window, and Mama says, "I can see your dirty pillows. Everyone will." And dirty pillows, by the way, is all one word. So it's, when I was younger, I thought, because I saw the movie first, but when I was younger, I thought it was dirty pillows, but actually it is just one word. So Mama begs Carrie to take it off, and that, you know, if they take it off and burn it and pray, Carrie will be forgiven for sinning. Carrie, of course, refuses, and Margaret starts hurting herself. She starts scratching herself and hitting herself to draw blood, and she's really off the deep end. And Mama says, "As Jezebel fell from the tower, let it be with you. And the dogs came and licked up the blood." That's on page 121. So Carrie is sick of it. She doesn't want to put up with it anymore, and she actually pushes her mom out of the room using her mind. So Carrie is ready for the prom. She's still nervous. She, I think, still believes in the back of her mind that it could go wrong. It could be a joke. She even says maybe it was all just an elaborate joke, the final crusher, the ultimate punchline, to leave her sitting here half the night in her gown. And she also says, of course it would be easier to stay here with Mama, safer. Maybe Mama was a fanatic, a freak, but at least she was predictable. The house was predictable. She never came home to laughing, shrieking girls who threw things. And then she goes through this whole, well, this is all while she's waiting for Tommy to pick her up. She goes through all this emotional consideration of what her life could end up being if she just said, no prom, gonna stay with mama, just gonna live my life the way I've been living it. You know, she realizes how boring and unfulfilled that life would be. She can't resign herself to just living the way she has been living. So while she waits, she's nervous. She's expending her nervous energy by lifting things and setting them back down, lifting heavy things. And we find out that stuff like that is no longer taxing on her. She is very powerful. It makes mention that she moved a car, actually. So while she's doing all these exercises, these calisthenics of the mind, she decides that if Tommy doesn't show up, she is going to wreck the house. That's just a thought that comes to her. Kind of like, oh, well, if he doesn't show up, this is the last straw, I am flipping out. So he does arrive, and he genuinely calls her beautiful, which I thought was sweet. They go to the prom, they enter the lobby, and they meet up with a few people, a few other students. I believe Tommy is friends with them, and they accept Carrie. They talk to her like she's a normal part of their group. The girl asks, you know, where she got her dress, just all the like small talk, and Carrie easily falls into it. She is, you know, adjusting. She is pulling this off. Okay, then we hear more about Billy Nolan. It flashes back to, you know, what Billy and Chris are doing. And Billy is a total psycho. It's like just all the things he does. He's a very bad guy. The part that makes me the most angry about Billy is that he uses his car. He loves his car. He worships his car. He uses his car to go out in the middle of the night and hunt down stray dogs, and he hits them with his car and kills them. We go over the fact that Billy has the 2 buckets of blood, and he broke into the gymnasium, walked out on this beam across the stage, and has hooked up the buckets of blood to some pulleys and rope, and, you know, the little X's were on the ground where the king and queen would be seated. So he's got it really planned out, and it's just a really creepy image too of him, kind of like a circus performer, walking on this beam above the stage with buckets of blood in his hands for balance. It's very creepy. And Chris had told him that it would likely be Tommy and Carrie who win. That would be good if it happened, but for Billy, any of the others would be all right too. He was beginning to think that it would be all right if it was Chris herself. Also during this time, we find out that Margaret's grandmother had the same power, the devil's power, that Carrie has. She wasn't as powerful as Carrie that we know of, but it says that she could light the fireplace without ever stirring from her rocker by the window. And after Margaret's grandma died, she found Carrie in her crib. She was younger than a year old, and she was levitating a bottle above her head and laughing at it. And Margaret almost killed Carrie at that moment, but her husband, Ralph, stopped her. And we will get to Ralph, I think, in the next video. I'm going to bring things back to Ralph. So Margaret is, you know, home alone while Carrie's at the prom. She's going crazier and crazier. She realizes that it's probably her last chance to kill her kid, to kill Carrie and get rid of this power. Again, we go back to the theme of blood. On page 148, Margaret's sitting there thinking about it, and it says, blood, fresh blood. Blood was always at the root of it, and only blood could expiate it. So she sharpens her knife, and she waits for Carrie. Stephen King mentions that her black hair is now almost completely white. And I always forget that Margaret has black hair, because Piper Laurie in the movie has red hair, and that's just what I think of when I think of Margaret White. So we're back at the prom, and we hear Carrie became quite sure that nothing bad could happen this night. Perhaps they themselves might even be voted king and queen of the prom. She smiled at her own folly, on page 151. Tommy at some point goes to get some punch. Carrie sees Miss Desjardins, and she has that moment where she thinks in her mind, she saw me naked and screaming and bloody. And I thought that was kind of funny, because that's probably what I would be thinking too if I ran into my gym teacher after the incident. But they do have a sincere moment, and I like that. Concurrently, Sue sits at home alone. We find out that her period is almost a week late, so she's kind of concerned about being pregnant. She's wondering if Tommy and Carrie are having a good time. She has that little nagging thought in the back of her mind that, what if Tommy falls in love with Carrie? Billy and Chris, they are discussing the plan for this thing that they're doing. Billy says he won't do it if she chickens out. And he's explaining to Chris that this is not a little joke. This is a very serious thing. It's a crime, what they're doing. It's he said it's criminal assault. And he tells her, this just perfectly sums up Billy to me. He says, when the buckets go, I'm going to run. When I get to the car, I'm going to drive away. If you're there, you can come. If you're not, I'll leave you. If I leave you and you spill your guts, I'll kill you. And that's on page 155. So Carrie and Tommy are actually enjoying themselves at the prom. Carrie cuts herself while they're voting for the king and queen, and it says the sight of blood was distasteful to her, which I thought was sad because of what's coming. And there is a tie. Now this is something that doesn't happen in the movie. In the movie, the ballot has been rigged and the king and queen just go immediately to Tommy and Carrie. But they have tied with another couple, so they have to pass out these runoff ballots so that everyone can vote again between the two couples that are the tie is a tiebreaker between the two couples. And Carrie, even though they voted for themselves the first time, Carrie doesn't want to do it again. And quote, she could not explain her dread, her sense of premonition. So at the last minute, Tommy decides to vote for themselves. But the way he said it, it made it sound like, I want this to be a magical night for you, so I'm voting for you. I think you deserve it, kind of thing. So he votes for them. Back at home, Margaret cuts herself. Margaret is getting crazier. She is still sharpening her little knife. She cuts herself and starts bleeding and thinks the blade had tasted flesh and not blood. She's all excited about this because she's ready to sacrifice Carrie. Cut back to Sue. She's still worried and feeling fear. The ballots are counted up finally, and Tommy and Carrie win by 1 vote. So if only they hadn't voted for themselves, everything would have been different. And it's interesting because Chris says it won't even be close, that, she called in some favors and Tommy and Carrie will win. She made it sound like they would win by a landslide, but in this revote, they only won by 1. Tommy kind of realizes that he does in fact love Carrie, and Carrie is kind of worried that laughter is coming, so she has primed herself thinking that everyone's gonna laugh at her. They ascend the stage and they sit on the thrones, and Chris pulls the rope, and she and Billy kind of look at each other like, what the fuck did we do? And they take off. So then there's, this part, all of this has all been very intercut between characters. We go back to Sue, and she has looked out the window and she sees that the school's on fire, which, hasn't exactly happened yet. Actual blood that gets dropped. People are laughing. Some are nervously laughing, hysterically laughing. Other people are not laughing. It's this whole sense of chaos. Carrie leaves the gym. She reappears and shuts the gym doors, locks them, prevents people from getting out. Some escape out the back door, but very few of them do. And she turns on the sprinklers, gets the gym completely wet, and then starts messing with the power lines. All the power switches and things, they blow. There's a whole bunch of electrocution. The gym just catches fire. It turns into an inferno. And there are oil tanks near the school, and they explode. So just all this crazy stuff is happening. Back at Sue's house, she has seen the fire. She heads out toward the school, and she was almost at the base of the hill when the school exploded. So there's a huge explosion. A witness sees Carrie walking down the street in her bloody dress, and she's grinning. She takes the gas pump nozzles off the hooks, lays them on the ground. Gas starts leaking all over the street, all over the sidewalk. And then we get a guy who had a lit cigarette, and he threw it, and everything just catches on fire. So all the gas stations explode. This isn't the only gas station. We cut back to Carrie's actual point of view. So this is her version of what happens. And she says they had finally given her the shower they wanted, the shower of blood, which is so sad. And when Carrie is on stage and bloody, and Miss Desjardins, she comes over and she's really compassionate, but Carrie sees her as laughing and unsympathetic, and she shoves her with her mind, shoves her out of the way. Carrie escapes from this laughing, crazy group of people, and she's just traumatized. She goes outside. She knows Tommy's dead. She's, really upset, and she's embarrassed and ashamed, and she's kind of ready to sneak home with her tail between her legs and just admit defeat and, just go back to her life with her mama. She realizes that she doesn't want to resign herself to her old life. So, quote, "It was time to teach them a lesson," page 186. And that starts off what we will call the burning. And it even says that some obscure sense told her that a few were getting out the fire doors, but let them. She would get them later. She would get all of them, every last one. She leaves the school, starts walking home, destroying things in her path, letting the fire hydrants empty out, lighting the, putting gas all over the place. Says she was unaware that she was scrubbing her bloodied hands against her dress like Lady Macbeth, or that she was weeping even as she laughed, or that one hidden part of her mind was keening over her final and utter ruin, page 190. She goes to church. She goes into a church to pray and finds no comfort in it. She leaves, and she paused on the lower step looking at the flocks of people streaming toward the center of town. Animals. Let them burn then. Let the streets be filled with the smell of their sacrifice. That's page 200. Carrie comes home. Margaret starts talking to her about how she and her husband had been weak and gave into sexual desire, and that's how Carrie was created, and she liked it, and told Carrie that she intended to kill her when she was born, but she didn't, and she was weak, and then she was going to kill her again the day of the stones, and basically this is the last chance. And Carrie says, "I came to kill you, Mama, and you were here waiting to kill me." They pray, and Carrie really genuinely seems to want to just stop all this, but then Margaret stabs her, and she stabs her in the shoulder right up to the hilt of the knife. And so what Carrie does is she decides to kill her mom. She slows her heart down and then stops it. And then she heads out the door and is going to the bar. So after Chris and Billy have done their little prank, or whatever we're calling it, they fight, have sex, get woken up by one of Billy's delinquent friends. The friend tells them about Carrie and how the entire town has been destroyed. So they get into Billy's car, and when they turn the headlights on, Carrie is standing in front of them. So she has left her house after killing her mom. She's stabbed. She is now in front of their car, and Billy tries to run her down, but she takes control of the car. Carrie takes control of the car, and she speeds them into the side of the bar, and they die. Now Sue is sitting there and, just shocked by everything that's happened. and she knows somehow that Carrie's mom is dead and that Carrie's hurt. She goes to Carrie's house and follows Carrie's blood trail. She finds Carrie in the bar parking lot, and they speak to each other telepathically. Carrie is kind of convinced that Sue is part of the trickery, and she shows Sue this like huge slideshow of lifelong dirty tricks that have been played on her. And Sue says no. She tells Carrie to look inside of her. So the sensation was terrifying. Her mind and nervous system had become a library. Someone in desperate need ran through her, fingers trailing lightly over shelves of books, lifting some out, scanning them, putting them back, letting some fall, leaving the pages to flutter wildly. It's on page 231. So very invasive, and lots of things were uncovered, lots of things that Sue didn't even really know herself and whatnot. Quote, but no ill will for Carrie personally, no plan to get her in front of everyone and undo her. The feverish feeling of being raped in her most secret corridors began to fade. She felt Carrie pulling back, weak and exhausted. So Carrie's almost dead. Quote, Sue tried to pull away, to disengage her mind, to allow Carrie at least the privacy of her dying, and was unable to. She felt that she was dying herself, and did not want to see the preview of her own eventual end. Page 232. So there's a huge mental scream, and then just, I guess, like a static type sensation. Quote, Sue was tuned in only on the blank idiot frequency of the physical nerve endings that would take hours to die. Page 232. So Carrie's dead. Sue runs away. She's really freaked out and upset, and she stops in a field. Quote, her rapid breathing slowed, caught suddenly as if on a thorn, and suddenly vented itself in one howling, cheated scream, as she felt the slow course of dark menstrual blood down her thighs. That's page 233. So we know that she is indeed not pregnant, which I always took it to mean that because she was so upset, I feel like she wanted to be pregnant because Tommy's dead. She knows Tommy's dead. That was like the last possible part of him that would still be with her. So I don't know. I'm not clear on that. But that is the end of part 2. Today is where we talk about part 3 of Carrie, the final part. It's very small, and I really don't even think that it had to be included. I would have been okay if the book had ended after part 2. But part 3, the wreckage. So it starts off, we see Carrie's death certificate, and Sue Snell is listed as the person identifying the deceased. No other next of kin for Carrie. Cause of death is listed as hemorrhage, shock, coronary occlusion, and or coronary thrombosis possible. So it talks about the town and how it has been utterly destroyed. It's been completely gutted, and people aren't even trying to rebuild. They are just defeated. I think it said that they swept up the like wreckage that was in the streets, and that was pretty much it. There wasn't a sense of hope and let's rebuild this and make it better than it was, or anything like that. It's been declared a national disaster, and people are just wanting to get out, basically. So one of the earlier death tolls was 409 people, with 49 missing, and then I believe that figure went up a little bit. So lots of people are moving away. They're pretty much shell-shocked, and we have, quote, the overall impression is one of a town that is waiting to die. That's on page 241. So we hear that the principal and Miss Desjardins have both resigned. The White Commission, which has peppered in little excerpts throughout the book, has determined that basically this was a one-off experience and, case closed. They said, quote, we find no reason to believe that a recurrence is likely or even possible. And that was on page 244. Sue had written a book, Sue Snell, and it's called My Name is Sue Snell. I want to think things over, decide what I'm going to do between now and the time when my light is carried down that long tunnel into blackness. And I really like that because that's what she had seen when Carrie died. It was just like this light that was just going down a long tunnel and then there was nothing. And so that's how she sees death. That's how she thinks death will be for her. I just really like that connection. Then at the very, very end, the last thing, we have an excerpt from a letter, and it's a mother describing to a relative how her 2-year-old little girl is moving marbles up and down without touching them. And it reminded her of her grandma. So that's the whole thing with Carrie, is that the telekinesis was something that her grandma had. It skips a generation, because there was a whole thing about it being a recessive gene. So it's something that men don't have, women do have. Men can be carriers, but it usually skips a generation, and the likelihood of someone having a baby with a person and they both have the gene is highly unlikely. But here we are, it's happening again. So I don't think that, I like the whole, it happens more often than we think kind of thing, and it makes you wonder about, oh, what is this kid going to do? But I don't know. To me, that always felt a little odd at the end. So that is Carrie, that is the end. And I thought that I would also just include a few miscellaneous things that I noticed while I was reading. I noticed a couple of continuity errors. On page 9, this is after the girls have thrown pads and tampons at Carrie. And Carrie is described with a tampon stuck in the middle of her pubic hair. But then on page 61, Miss Desjardins is recounting things, and she very clearly recalls a wet napkin plastered squarely in the middle of her pubic hair. So I thought it was kind of a silly little discrepancy. On page 89, Stephen King references the Boston Red Sox, which I am interested in seeing if he mentions the Red Sox in most of his work. Just curious, I know that he's a huge fan. On page 13, we find out that Carrie was born on the 21st of September, 1963, and Ralph died in February of 1963. So he died when Margaret was pregnant. Margaret White was pregnant with Carrie. Margaret delivered Carrie at her house. She didn't have anyone helping her, it was just her. So early on, that's what we've been told. And then later, when Carrie comes home and her mom is going over basically the sordid history of how Carrie came to be and how Margaret was going to kill her several times, Margaret says, "And then he was dead, and then I thought God had visited me with cancer." So she's referencing the fact that Ralph died, and she thought her pregnancy was a cancer that was going to kill her. But then, earlier on page 148, while Carrie's at the prom and Margaret is sitting there thinking about her grandmother and how her grandma had powers like Carrie's, she says that, she found Carrie in her crib levitating her bottle and laughing at the bottle like it was a big game, and she almost killed Carrie at that point, but Ralph had stopped her. So if Ralph died before Carrie was born, I don't see how he could have stopped Margaret from killing Carrie, and Carrie shouldn't have been killed at that time. I don't know, so that one seemed like a big continuity error that I never really paid attention to before. I never really noticed it. And I think that is it. So that was the very first episode of the Stephen King Sematary Club. I thought it went okay. Have a spooky day.